Hi, I'm Jason Odell, and this is the Sensor Plane Photography Podcast, where light and technology come together. Thanks for joining me. You can always find me on my website at luminescentphoto.com. Don't forget to check that out. And today I'm going to be talking about how to pick the right lens. If you're buying a new lens, it's a huge investment, and it can really drive you nuts. Now, what I really want to talk about today are some of the factors that you should be choosing. And I want to talk about the lenses that people talk about as being the best and what's actually the lenses that you'll use and what might be the best for you. And they're not always the same thing. I've got a whole bunch of Nikon lenses that I've used, that I've purchased myself, and I'll be talking about them. But these considerations would be appropriate for any camera system of any brand manufacturer. So let's talk about the things that most people look at when they obsess about, oh, I want to get this new lens. Oftentimes we're looking at websites, online forums, discussions, Facebook, wherever, and people say, what lens should I get? I want to take, this kind of picture or that. Well, most of the time people say, oh, you should get the best glass. And the best glass, by what they mean, is the best optical performance. So that means fast glass, the best coatings, tends to be the most expensive. But optical performance is only one component of how you should choose your gear. The other component should include how you're going to use it, your subject, how you're going to carry your gear, size and weight. Of course, price becomes very important too. Not everybody has a spare $10,000 lying around to buy a 600 millimeter f4 lens, even though it's a fantastic piece of glass. So is the best lens really what's best for you? So I want to compare some different things. Optically speaking, in 2014, we are today coming to a close. We're coming up to the holidays, which is why I think a lot of people might be considering buying a new lens. We've got a lot of tools with digital photography that we didn't have with film, specifically in terms of post-production. And those tools, especially if you shoot digital raw, they're going to mitigate some, but not all, of the optical negative components of lenses. So optically speaking, when we talk about a lens, you want it to be sharp, corner to corner, center sharpness, corner sharpness. How sharp is it wide open versus stop down? That's an important component, and you can't get away from sharpness. But there's other components like chromatic aberration or color fringing, light fall off, sometimes called vignetting, distortion. Those three things can be corrected in post-processing. In fact, a lot of times they can be corrected to the point where you don't notice them. Now, certainly, it's nicer to have a lens that has better color contrast and is better corrected. The less correction you have to do, there'll be less distortion, you'll have a higher quality image. But quite frankly, unless you're making really large prints or the lens is a real dog, you're not going to see those slight imperfections on your normal day-to-day images. So when you read reviews about, the vignetting and the optical performance, chromatic aberration, that sort of thing, consider that you can fix a lot of that. And so it's not as important as it used to be when you were shooting on film and you couldn't do those kinds of corrections easily. Now, sharpness, of course, is still important, and that can factor into your decision on your lenses. But do you need a lens to be sharp wide open? Or are you going to be shooting with that lens stopped down? As someone who does a lot of landscape photography, you might be able to shoot most of the time at f8 or f11 or even more than that. And that's going to mitigate a lot of softness in the corners that you might see shooting a lens wide open at f2.8 or f4 or something like that. So that's a factor as well. So when you're buying a lens, there's these factors go in. The quality of the glass, and if you get a lens from any of your camera manufacturers or most of the major third parties, you can get pretty good glass these days. That's not a big deal. The aperture, how wide does the lens open? So a lens that has an f2 maximum aperture, or f2.8 I should say, like this one, okay, is going to allow you to shoot faster shutter speeds for any given ISO. It's also going to have a reduced depth of field when you shoot it wide open, and that can be important for things like portraits or low light shooting. A fast lens is also going to allow your autofocus system to work a little better, a little faster, more accurately, because it lets more light into the camera to fall on the autofocus sensors. But that being said, these fast lenses typically are bigger and heavier than their slower counterparts. So here's a 24 to 70 f2.8. Here is a 24 to 120 f4. Both good lenses, both constant aperture zooms. Okay, this one is part of Nikon's holy trinity of lenses. This is one of the best lenses Nikon makes, hands down. This one is optically very good, not as good as the other lens, but has some different characteristics. So let's take a look at that and let's consider what might be important when you're choosing a lens. Okay, let's talk about these kits for a minute. I talked about this holy trinity of Nikon lenses, and we'll start there. These three lenses are considered to be some of the best lenses that Nikon makes, especially if you're shooting a full frame or FX body camera. There are three lenses in this group. They're all constant f2.8 aperture lenses. They're all very big and heavy and very expensive. So here is the 24 to 70 f2.8 AFS-G lens. Here is the super wide, the 14 to 24 f2.8 AFS-G, and the 70 to 200 f2.8 AFS VR-G VR2 lens. These are absolutely three of the best lenses in terms of optical quality and overall performance that you can get for a Nikon system. And Canon has similar counterparts as well as other manufacturers. These are simply some of the Nikon's finest lenses. If you were to get this kit for your camera, you pretty much couldn't blame your equipment for your images anymore. These lenses are all really, really good. You would be looking at spending, to get these three lenses, over $6,000, and the weight of this kit is about 7.5 pounds. So you get the idea that this is fairly large and heavy. Like I said, you cannot go wrong with this glass. All right, let me compare that to a slightly smaller kit, what I would call the f4 kit. Here's the 16 to 35 f4 AFS VR lens, 24 to 120 f4 VR, and 70 to 200 f4 VR. Now these three lenses, you can see they're smaller than their counterparts. This kit would cost you just under $4,000 today, and it weighs under 5 pounds. So you're saving over 2.5 pounds of weight and $2,300 in price. And that can be important when you're choosing these. So which is it? Which of these lenses do I recommend? I mean, they're both really good. I own both of them. Which ones am I using more often than not? Let's take a little side-by-side comparison of some of these lenses. I'm going to start with the super wides. Okay. So I got my 14 to 24, which is a 2-pound lens, 2.1 pounds. I've got my 16 to 35, which is f4 but VR, weighs 1.5 pounds and costs about $700 less. Optically, this is the killer lens. It's sharper in the corners at all focal lengths. This is an outstanding lens. Better sharpness than the 16 to 35. However, when I pack my gear, I almost always take the 16 to 35 these days, except for a few circumstances. Why is that? Well, a couple reasons. It's not the price. I bought them both. Size, it's easier to pack the 16 to 35. Weight, it saves me 1.5 pounds. And the 16 to 35 takes a filter. So I can put a polarizing filter on here, although I don't usually use that. But my solid neutral density filters, my graduated neutral density filters, I can use with this lens. I can't use them with this lens unless I get this ridiculously huge front filter adapter. It's nuts. This lens also tends to flare a lot. If I'm outside, if I'm doing landscapes and there's sun anywhere near the frame, it's going to create lens flare, and that can be a real problem. It's not as bad with the 16 to 35. So when people are choosing their lenses, when they ask me, I almost always recommend this lens. 16 to 35 f4 AFS-G VR2 zoom Nikkor lens. When do I use the 14 to 24? Well, I still use it. That's why I'm not getting rid of it. I use it for indoor photography, where I want really good performance in low light, better focus. I use it for astrophotography, things like star trails or the Milky Way, where I need that extra aperture of light to let in more starlight and to get that really wide view. So both can be used. They both have their uses, but if I were going to pick one, I'd get this one, 16-35. Okay. Let's move on to the mid-range zoom. So I got two lenses here in my mid-range. The aforementioned 24 to 70 2.8 and the 24 to 120 f4. Now, I only recently picked up this 24 to 120. I got it because my needs as a photographer are starting to shift a little bit. I'm doing more workshops that are urban, city, and travel photography. And the reason why I picked this lens up was not because it's that much smaller. I mean, it's a little bit smaller, it's a little bit lighter. This one weighs 2 pounds, this one weighs 1.5 pounds. So a little bit of weight savings. This is still my go-to lens for landscapes. I mean, I take so many images with this lens. It is one of the best lenses. And what I really love about the optical quality of this lens is that it creates wonderful starburst patterns when you stop down and you're getting the sun or street lights. It's a fantastic lens. But it's a little bit limiting when I use it in the field. The zoom range, 24 to 70, standard zoom. 70 you might think is telephoto. It's not as long as you think. When I can go out to 120 millimeters with this lens, I give up a little bit of optical quality. The performance, isn't quite as good. There's a little more distortion. Big deal. I corrected for it in post. But this lens gives me reach that I don't have with this lens. And that means two things. One, I don't have to change lenses as often. Two, it means that depending on where I'm at, I might not even need to bring a 70 to 200 millimeter lens. This is a fantastic walk-around lens. It's not super light, but it's really easy to use, to walk around with, and it's very versatile. And for a lot of situations, especially in urban areas, 24 to 120 is all the range you need. So it saves me not just the half-pound difference here, but it saves me packing another 2 or 3 pound lens by eliminating a lens from my bag in certain situations. So landscapes, where I've got my lenses, I'm probably going to bring this. Cityscapes, I'm probably bringing the 24 to 120 because it's that much more versatile. It also has VR stabilization that this one doesn't have. So that's something to be considered too. So even though I'm losing a stop of light in terms of shutter speed, I'm gaining 4 stops of stabilization. It's not going to freeze my subjects, but it is going to help with camera shake. So consider this one if you're a travel photographer. Even landscapes you can use this lens for. Lastly, we've got our telephoto zoom. 70 to 200 2.8. Beautiful lens, fantastic lens. 70 to 200 f4. You can see when it comes to traveling that this lens is smaller and lighter. This 2.8, 3.39 pounds. f4, 1.87 pounds. So that's a huge difference in weight. It's almost half the weight. Now, here's an interesting thing. This f4 lens, I reviewed it earlier. I'm using it more often. And the reason why I'm using it more often is because I found it to be just as sharp as the 2.8 lens. It's smaller, it's lighter, it's easier to pack. I don't like the tripod collar, the removable collar, quite as much as the integrated tripod collar here, but it works. And for landscapes and most cityscape photography, this is a fantastically sharp lens. It also focuses closer than the big boy here. This lens has a magnification of about 0.27. The 2.8 lens has a magnification of 0.12, meaning I can get closer. And that's going to offset some of the differences in depth of field that you might have between the f4 and the f2.8. Now, why might you want the f2.8? This is an action lens. This lens gives you that extra stop of shutter speed, pure shutter speed for sports, for action, and it's also going to do better with teleconverters. If you want to use a 2x converter on this one, you're going to get a 5.6 lens. Use a 2x teleconverter on this one, you get an f8 lens, and that can have significant repercussions in your photography. But for travel and landscapes, this one's going in my bag. For sports or action or indoor theater, this might be a better choice. It also costs a lot more. So those are some things. Now, one other lens you might consider, and got this guy over here, is if you only shoot telephoto focal lengths in sort of urban settings or while traveling, and you don't need, and you don't want to carry this big lens or the 70-200, you could consider this little guy here, the 70-300 f3.5 or sorry f4.5 to 5.6 VRG Nikkor. The VR lens is the one you want to get. There's an earlier version that doesn't have VR. It's not as good of a lens. This one's okay. It is optically not as good as either of those other two lenses. You need to stop down a little more to get the corners sharp. But in a pinch, this one's small, it's lighter, it's easy to pack, and it only costs last time I looked, $586 at B&H. It's £1.50. So it's a little lighter than the f4 70-200, gives you a little extra reach, and it can pack even smaller in a kit. So it's something to think about. The last thing also to consider is if you're looking for prime lenses. And Nikon and I believe Canon, they both offer primes, 35, 50, 85 millimeter primes. And these will be fast lenses. You can get either an f1.4 or an f1.8 version. The f1.4 versions are fantastic. They are sharper, wide open, they have less light fall off. Optically, they're better. They're bigger, they're heavier, and in some cases, they're double and even triple the price of the 1.8 lenses. So if you're a casual shooter and you just want to have a fast prime, consider getting the 1.8 version of those lenses, the 35-1.8, the 50-1.8, the 85-1.8, because optically, they're almost as good, and a lot of the areas where they fall down and things like fall off, again, you can correct for in post. So that's my thought on lenses that I have. You know, the best glass for you is not necessarily what the benchmarks say the best optical performance is. Anybody can put a lens on a benchmark, take a picture of a brick wall, say, hey, this one's sharper, has less distortion. But at the end of the day, you are the one who has to decide what you're taking pictures of and how far you're carrying your gear and how much you want to pack. Do you have to go on a plane? Or are you going in a car? Do you want to carry around a 8-pound kit, or do you want to carry around a 5-pound kit? Those extra pounds they add up over the course of a day, and they can really wear you out. So there's a lot of things to consider. Make the right choice for you. Until next time, I'm Jason Odell at luminescentphoto.com. I'll see you on the Sensor Plane podcast. Thanks a bunch.